I think it comes back to that creative spirit within us. And anyone that ignites their own creative spirit is kind of like a mirror to other people who haven't yet ignited. So it's going to feel uncomfortable,
Uh-huh.
and that crabs in the bucket, like, oh, I want to push them away or put them down.
Joining us today is Rachel Perez, a multidimensional creative coach and musical artist who helps high achievers gain strategic insight, creative perspective, and grounded direction to create meaningful impact, sustainable success, and a life well lived. She holds both undergraduate and master's degrees in classical flute performance and brings more than 20 years of experience across professional music, performance, arts, leadership, marketing, and competitive athletics. A former competitive athlete with USA Boxing, Rachel integrates discipline and creativity in every engagement, supporting clients and doing exceptional work while living fully aligned, healthy, and inspired lives. A professional flutist and house music DJ, her mission is to help people tap into their hearts through music and dance, creating space for joy, healing, and inspiration. Hi, Rachel. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the Savvy Shift podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks, Samantha. It's really great to be here. And it was just so fun to meet you. And we chatted earlier before this and connected about our common interests.
Yeah. So, generally, the way that I like to start these conversations is with a little bit of an origin story so that the audience gets to know you a little bit and how you got to being where you are doing the work that you're doing today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So after many years of practicing so many different crafts, as you mentioned in my bio, I've done various things to trying to do them to the highest level that I possibly could. I remember one specific day when I was working for a performing arts company as their director of marketing. And as part of this role, it was my job to oversee all the creative that we would put out in our marketing and our ads and in the community. And I remember one day specifically, I was walking down the street from the ballet to the grocery store to grab some lunch. And on one of the pole signs was one of the banners that I'd worked with my team to, envision and create and make into a sign to market the performing arts. And I remember this one moment where I looked up at the pole sign, and normally I would have felt so much joy and pride in my creative process and in, this collaboration that I did with my team. And I remember looking up and just feeling nothing. And I just felt kind of dead inside. And I said to myself, who even am I today? I'm not
Mm-hmm.
the person that I thought I would become. I thought I would be, a musician of a certain status and caliber, or an athlete, or, that I would have more success in my career by now. And this really sent me on a journey to really unpack where that feeling was coming from and to kind of rediscover who I am as an artist. And so up to that point, I had been studying classical music at a really high level, and I'd run marathons. I'd competed in sports, one of the hardest sports of boxing, to a really high level. So I was what they called a perfectionist and high achiever. And I had hit a point where it really left me feeling unsatisfied and, unfamiliar with the person that I'd become. And so I went out on a journey to sort of unpack that a bit and discover who I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm. So, what did that journey look like for you?
Yeah, it was a several year process, really, of kind of really sitting down and saying, okay, in many ways, on paper, I look very successful, but in my heart, I feel like a failure in many ways because X, Y, and Z that I wanted to have happen didn't have happen. So I started down this personal development journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I started listening to different speakers and trying to explore what I really liked, what I wanted to do. Because, going back into, okay, I'm going to go back and be a musician, or I'm going to go and be a yoga teacher, or I'm going to go and be this or that, everything was kind of like, I got to do these things and kind of rev up. And I was really burnt out. I didn't have any more rev in my tank.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I really miss music. And so what's like the most simplest way to find my way back to music? I said, I'm going to go on one of these music apps. I didn't even use music apps back at that point very much. I think it was like around 2018, 2019. And I
Mhm.
said, I'm going to just explore some different sounds and see what I like and just take off all the rules and just start listening to different stuff because I hadn't been listening to music that much, but I missed it. Lo and behold, I stumbled upon house music and deep house, and I started really exploring music and going to shows and, listening to seminars and meeting with counselors and coaches and things like this. And I'll never forget one talk that I heard a very famous personal development teacher give. And, in his big boomy voice, he was preaching that perfection is the lowest standard. And I remember feeling like at that moment, my whole world kind of melted because I literally had spent my life and my whole education, thousands of dollars of student loans, more than 10,000 hours at that point, pursuing my craft as a classical flutist to the highest level and going to great lengths to learn from the best artists and to achieve perfection in my performance. And when everything is on the line, it's like if I don't win this job, I won't be able to have a job or pay my bills or have food to eat or rent, just kind of
Mhm.
doing art in this very high stakes situations. And so I said, well, how could I redefine what perfection is? Like, and how do I redefine like what is acceptable and like how am I enough if I'm not perfect, if I don't achieve these things? And so it really started an unpacking of noticing how much sort of feeling like I was never enough and
Mhm.
always failing, never perfect enough or never good enough at what I was doing, and just always trying to get better at things, how that had really inhibited my ability to pretty much enjoy anything.
Mhm.
And so I started to really redefine what that looked like and for me and rediscover joy and then also rediscover creating in a way that was more healthy for me.
Mhm. I think those kinds of thoughts are very common among people. That's a very common limiting belief that you're not enough or you're not good enough. But I think, it stems from different things for different people. So, can you explain in the instance that you felt like, have you identified where that came from in your own life? And then what are the things that you worked through to reprogram yourself that you are enough and that you are worthy and deserving and of living a life of joy.
Yeah. Well, that is the golden question, right?
Yeah.
That is sort of this thing that we're after to redefine. That is the process of reclaiming the creative process and how that's integrated into everyday life. So, I think for me, reclaiming the creative process isn't something that just happened like one big bang. It
Mhm.
happens in layers, kind of like an onion,
Yeah.
where I gain a realization and I integrate it, and then I gain another realization and I integrate it. And then I see that little devil on the shoulder pop up again. Oh, you're not good enough. Oh, maybe I try a new situation or put myself out there in a certain way and I have to kind of reface it, not all over again, but sort of like a narrative that you're constantly working with, to
Mhm.
shape the direction that you want to go. So I think for me, it was really about getting to know who am I, right?
Mhm.
Because for a lot of high performing individuals, whether that be an athlete, a musician, I mean, I've seen it with dancers, with high elite competitive athletes, whether you're doing surfing or boxing or running, long distance running, or as a musician, a lot of times when you're not able to do the thing anymore, maybe you have an injury or
Mhm.
maybe you don't have as much time to invest in your art because you had to figure out how you're going to go and pay your bills and put a roof over your head. And you think, okay, well, if I'm not doing this thing, well, then who am I?
Mhm.
And when you do something to such a high level, I even have seen it with a lot of my clients that I work with that are some are scientists and doctors. They have to achieve a really high level of education and really competitive fields. And
Mhm.
so if you ever strip back and hit a point where you take off the title, you
Mhm.
take off the identity of doing that thing. Like if I'm not a musician, if I'm not a dancer, if I'm not a doctor, if I'm not a scientist, if I'm not excelling at the top of my field, at the top of my industry, what am I even doing here? Like, do I
Mhm.
even deserve to be on this planet? Do I even deserve to be alive if I can't contribute, my passion? And it's that's kind of what leads to this tortured artist, right? Is
Mhm.
because oftentimes find ourselves, which I had found myself in a state of, is just feeling like, well, then who am I? If I'm not that, then who am I? So
Mhm.
part of this reclaiming process was really about digging deep to see who am I, and am I worthy of love? Am I worthy of being here, whether or not I am doing my art? So really
Mhm.
removing those deep, deep layers of deep seated fears. And I think you asked, where does it come from? I
Mhm.
think it comes for many people that I've worked with and for myself, it sort of came from programming from all different places.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's in your childhood home, of course, where you're, you know, um, either disciplined a lot or there's this certain standard that you're expected to live up to, pressure to get straight A's, whatever that may have been for you as a child, or then as you grow up and go to school and you see people that is the haves and the have-nots, and it's like, okay, I've
Mhm.
got to do things if I want to be in the haves group. I don't want to be in the have-nots group.
Mhm.
So it's things we hear, things we see, things that sort of reaffirm to us that we have to do X, Y, and Z to have value,
Mhm.
rather than that we're intrinsically worthy and valuable and that we can pursue those things as an expression um, of our creativity and
Mhm.
with curiosity rather than as a need to prove our worth.
Yeah. So one thing that you said that really interested me was that, on paper you looked super, super successful, but inside you felt like a failure. And I'm wondering, like, because I think that's kind of common. So does that stem from, in your opinion or in your experience, does that stem from because we're not necessarily doing the things that we want to do, or is it because we're not making enough money? Or I guess my question is, like, how do we define success in cases like that? And like, where was the dichotomy or the disconnect for you in that?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. Because I think it is a little different for everyone, Once you
Yeah.
identify where this feeling of inferiority came from,
Mhm.
uh, then you can start to unpack what the antidote is, right?
Yeah.
I know for me, I'm a minority. I'm a Mexican, Latin American woman, and
Mhm.
I was in industry in classical music. That I always felt less than. I always felt like, "Oh, I'm the poor Mexican kid. I don't really belong here," And so those are
Mhm.
narratives that were maybe passed down to me from relatives or from just ancestral cultural programming or,
Mhm.
feeling like I didn't fit in certain rooms, feeling like, I wasn't good enough. So some of it is unpacking that, and some of it could just be coming from, just a desire to feel safe, right? I know a
Mhm.
lot of us who maybe didn't grow up with, um, a real sense of like, I'm going to be okay financially no matter what. You feel like you're
Mhm.
always scrambling to provide for yourself. It's back to
Mhm.
that starving artist mentality, right?
Mhm.
Like there's never enough. And I have to do these things or else I'm literally not going to survive. So some of
Mhm.
it could be very survival driven and kind of unpacking that and how do I survive if my nervous system's constantly in fight or flight of
Mhm.
like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen next? When's the next shoe gonna drop?
Yeah.
So all these different factors, that can impact that feeling of not enoughness, and
Mhm.
really sit down and saying, "Okay, well, what is success for me?" I kind of really hit a point where I said to myself in this process, "Okay, my goal of success is to wake up not feeling depressed.
Mhm.
I wanna wake up and feel like life is good because I decide it's gonna be good.
Mhm.
and really starting to shift my attitudes, shift my perspectives so that I could start to change those deep-seated beliefs that weren't helping me to feel safe, that weren't
Mhm.
helping me to feel like I belonged, that weren't helping me to feel like I was worthy of love or friendship or success or,
Mhm.
any of those things.
Mhm.
So, it was also really a process of shifting my mindset from scarcity into abundance, and what does that look like? What is abundance to me, and how do I shift my mind towards gratitude to be grateful? And I know that sounds like a overused cliche, but really training myself to sit with gratitude in a way that I could feel it in my body,
Mhm.
being
Mhm.
in or looking to the bright side, looking to the positive, since there was nothing to be gained from being so negative of myself, negative of my surroundings, negative of my results, right? But just starting to look and see, okay, where is the good? How can I
Mhm.
harvest that good? And also really reframing, you mentioned things on paper that sounded like success, but that I felt like a failure about. I think a lot of times for high achievers, we run into what's called fallacy arrival as well, where we're like, okay,
Mhm.
once I get the diploma, then I'll feel good. Once I get the promotion, once I get hit the ticket sales goal, once I do these things, then I'll be good. But the reason that those things then all stack up on paper and we still don't feel enough is because it's not long-term peace. It's just
Uh-huh.
like that kind of constant drive for approval, for control. So I had to really shift and say, okay, what can I control? And how do I give myself that approval within myself so that I can go out and take a risk without my identity being tied to the result, right? So it's kind of
Mhm.
the result from the process and learning to
Mhm.
really fall in love with the process as well. I
Yeah.
love this. I love this quote from Elizabeth Gilbert in The Big Magic, where she says, creative living is living a life that is driven more strongly by curiosity than by fear. And I think that's for me, that encapsulates a lot of the shift that I went through.
Mhm.
Because a lot of times that feeling not enough,ness and feeling like even though you've achieved a lot, you're driven by fear because like you feel like if you don't get these things done, then you're going to be like kind of caught red-handed and feel a lot of shame. And I think a
Mhm.
lot of it comes from this drive of trying to avoid the feelings of shame
Mhm.
of having not achieved. I remember one of my boxing coaches had a t-shirt that I absolutely loved at the time. And it said in big, I think it was a Nike shirt, right? It was like this big yellow shirt and it said in these big black letters, fear failure. you know? But I
Yeah.
was like, yeah, yeah, you at all costs, you must win at all costs, don't be afraid. But what that did was it made me kind of over time when I was always trying to achieve, always trying to excel, always trying to get the next thing on the list and keep stacking up my resume. It was because I wasn't able to sit with my emotions and
Mhm.
sit here and say, you know what? It's okay to feel fear. It's okay to feel shame. And then it kind of released its control on me and its hold, right? Because the thing that causes anger and fear and frustration, like the more we feed those, the more they start to control us.
Mhm.
So by acknowledging it, seeing it, letting yourself feel it, only then could I start to break that spell of
Mhm.
unworthy, break that spell and acknowledge, hey, these programmings aren't mine. Like I'll be safe, I'll be okay. I'm worthy, I'm good enough. And that's non-negotiable. Like
Mhm.
I don't need to go negotiate that based on my performance or my results. Um
Mhm.
and then also another thing I like to do is mining for the good. In other words, taking pride in the things that you have accomplished. So much we hit so often as high achievers, we hit a goal and it's like, okay, great, next, on to the next. Without just actually taking a moment to say, you know, give ourselves a little pat on the back and how uncomfortable it can be to
Mhm.
um receive acknowledgement, right? Because we're like, okay, yeah, 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 but that was just that. I'm like on to the next thing already. And being
Mhm.
able to say, no, I'm worthy of rest. I'm worthy
Mhm.
of taking a breath after that big accomplishment and saying,
Mhm.
okay, that was really cool. I
Yeah.
appreciated that. I appreciated who I became in that. And then kind of on the same lines of the Elizabeth Gilbert quote, she has another one, that says, "You don't have to create something that makes you money. You don't have to create something that is acknowledged by others. You just have to create something that brings you closer to the version of yourself that you wanna be." And so really realizing that all these things, I'm grateful for all the things that I did. And and even though I might not have gotten some sort of preconceived result that I thought would bring me peace, joy, happiness, satisfaction.
Mhm.
Looking back now, and as the famous quote goes, you can only connect the dots looking backwards.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for everything I've done and everything that is on paper because it helped me become who I am today, even if it was painful, even if it wasn't the result I wanted, even if I struggled with who I felt like I was becoming. And when I felt like I was walking down that street and saw that pole banner and I said, whoa, I'm like really missing the mark. That was good because we sort of fail our way to our goals and that success
Mhm.
is not and that it's that feedback that reminds us, wait a minute, there's that spark inside me that just there's this spark inside me that I need to find again. I had it. And I got robotic somehow in the process. And so um I'm just so passionate about like lighting myself back up and helping others light themselves back up too, because that's really where we change the world. When we enrich our lives, it enriches those around us. And then that's what ultimately um, raises the vibration of humanity and helps us make the world a better place is when we're all creating, because everyone's creative.
Mhm.
Whether you're an artist or a musician, or whether you just like to cook a really nice meal, or whether you are working on a project that's very scientific and you kind of like go up to the whiteboard and do all these formulas, like you're being creative. And when you get those juices flowing, I just think that's really where the magic happens.
Mhm. Yeah, and I can't remember where I was talking about this or who I was talking about this with, but it's like, you know, the world or like is built in like a masculine feminine framework, right? So there's like
Mm,
the logistical side, but then there's also the creative side, and like our brains are built such that we have both, right? So the left hemisphere
mhm.
is more logic based, and then the right hemisphere is more creative based. And so the fact is that like we are creative beings and we are put here in order to create, right? And that's part of our expansion process is through creation.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's also I will just say, because I do work with a lot of people who are super high achievers and doing it as a career, as a part of a specific industry, whether that be, high level classical music or competitive sports. And I will also add that, reclaiming that creative process, it's not about abandoning ambition or abandoning professionalism. It's just making sure that the way in which the individual is doing it is taking care of them holistically, and that creative
Mhm.
process still is human and it belongs
Mhm.
to and not just the systems that profit from it, and not just fitting into these boxes, because for athletes, it is a lot about like, hey, if I do this competition and I'm going to win this money, and then that's going to help me, do X, Y, and Z in my career. So it's not to negate the fact that that is still part of a high achiever's experience, but just how do you go through that experience and care for your whole self, your
Mhm.
emotions, your heart, your health, your physical health, and see it as part of you becoming your best self and sharing your craft with the world in a way that's benefiting you and benefiting others. So I love
Mhm.
this other quote that says, amateurs compete, but professionals create. And I
Mhm.
love this because, in sports and in music, it is really competitive.
Yeah.
But when you go, I mean, as a dancer in a competition or as a musician in a competition, or any sort of things, it is about, competing. And
Mhm.
how do you show up against your competitors? But I always argue that like the people that are at the top of their game, they don't go out just to put other people down and just to be better than the other person. They want to be the best that they can be. And any artist that has done something amazing at a super high level will tell you when they were doing that, they were in flow state. They were
Mhm.
perfectly present with themselves, with some sense of a higher energy and
Yeah.
with their and I think that is what just is so exciting to me and how we can get into that state in everyday living and that,
Mhm.
it goes in peaks and flows. Not every moment of every day is meant to be like that, but how do
Yeah.
we continually seek that and find that and cultivate that within ourselves and create space for others to experience that as well?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think another comment or another quote that I've heard about along those lines is, yeah, people at the bottom compete, but people at the top collaborate. And so it's not about it's about working together to create something bigger, right? And I think you had said, like the people at the top aren't pushing other people down, right? Like they're focusing on themselves and focusing on making themselves better, but also working on helping bring other people up behind them too.
Exactly, exactly, and creating community, creating space
Mhm.
where everyone belongs, because
Mhm.
whether you're creating art or whether you're experiencing it, it's another funny thing too, because a lot of times when I tell people I'm a musician or, I play the flute or that I've performed in symphony orchestras, a lot of times they'll immediately say, "Oh yeah, I maybe took lessons as a kid, but I'm not good, or I'm not professional, or I'm not a musician, I'm not creative," right?
Mhm.
But I'll be seeing them at the performance, and they said, "You are, because you've experienced the performance. You've
Yeah.
been a part of this experience. You've been a part of the energy, the vibe." Like as artists, we need people to come and join the space with us, to
Mhm.
share experience, to share in hearing it and seeing it and experiencing it with us. Um, it's so interesting because I recently came across some data that I actually heard it in another talk, and then I went and found it, but that they did a study 'cause, in performing arts, in marketing, that's what I've spent, like, my 18-year career before coaching was in arts marketing.
Mhm.
And there was this interesting data that I heard that said they did a study on people age 50 plus, and people who went to or experienced some sort of performing arts event or live music or something like that once or twice a year were 14% lower risk of dying over a 14-year period. And I was like, wow, like it literally adds years to your life. And then the study went on to say that people who did these activities every few months, that 14% goes up to 31% lower risk of dying.
Really?
I was like, wow, like experiencing art, going to a theater or a symphony or a show or music or being in community where you're supporting the arts or hearing the arts. You don't have to be. It's not like, in other words, these benefits aren't just for the people on the stage that are the top 1% or whatever,
Mhm.
right? Like
Mhm.
the benefits of art can literally add years to our lives.
That's a crazy statistic, actually. That's a
Isn't
really
it?
crazy. Yeah, that's really crazy. But, I like what you said about like artists building a community and artists needing someone to perform to, right? Because it helps to cultivate that energy, and it's a give and take, right? So like as an artist, I'm giving, my energy to the crowd, but they're also giving and reciprocating their energy back to me, right? And
Totally.
yeah, I remember one of the so way back in the day when I was, I don't know, a young teenager, and my aunt used to take us to this string quartet. The Winnipeg Symphony had this like string quartet or something. I'm not sure if it was a symphony, but it was these four guys and a pianist. And I remember like, even as a teenager, right, when I'm supposed to be listening to, like, whatever's on the radio those days, I don't even know. But anyways, I was going to these string quartets and I remember I enjoyed it so thoroughly because there was this cellist and I remember his face to this day. There was this cellist there and he was so absorbed in the music and so passionate about what he was doing. His facial expressions were just like mesmerizing. And I spent the entire time just watching this guy's face. And even as like a 13-year-old teenage girl, I was so like enthralled by this music, you know? And it's like you're sitting in this auditorium with this guy making these faces and it was just amazing to behold. So I've experienced that, on the receiver's end.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's incredible.
it is. And I think that's why I feel like becoming a house and techno DJ after, a career as a classical artist, it's really re-inspired my love of music and my love
Mhm.
of sharing that music
Mhm.
because it really enables me to engage with others in the sense of feeling and experiencing something together, the
Mhm.
vibe, the energy.
Mhm.
Um, and I just can I tell you one quick story?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So it's a story that it's very recent, right? This week. It happened a couple days ago. So
Okay.
I'm still constantly evolving in how I am experiencing the creative process because this is a lifelong journey. And like I said, it's an onion, it's layers. We go in so many different cycles. And I had been practicing a lot of techno lately because I really want to release a set with some of my
Mhm.
current favorite techno music. And then I was asked to do, a set in the club last Friday night, and I was gonna make it more house music. So I was kind of like, "What do I wanna play?" "What's really resonating with me right now?" And I stayed up really late, like, 2 nights before the gig, and I was just, like, kind of in this flow state of, like,
Mhm.
exploring music and, like, listening to this, listening to that, seeing how the pieces would fit together, figuring out what I wanted the vibe to be, recording, listening back, changing it, and then
Yeah.
at the last minute, finding a whole bunch of new stuff, which, they say you're never supposed to just play a bunch of new stuff. Play stuff
Yeah.
so you know how it all works. But I
Yeah.
did what they said you should do, and I got a bunch of new stuff. And it was an hour and a half set. And, but I just really felt in my soul that, like, I knew the vibe. I knew what I needed, and my soul
Mhm.
needed to feel a homecoming at this event.
Mhm.
I wanted to feel, literally this creative process, I
Mhm.
wanted to coming to fruition, coming to life, coming to, spirit and energy coming through me, through this music.
Mhm.
And, I was really my brother came over for dinner beforehand, and you know how it is before you perform, I still get nervous. Of course I get nervous before I perform, and I'm like, "Okay, this new song, I need to hear it just one more time. Okay, let me practice the transition. Okay, I think I got it." But
Yeah.
then when you go to perform, you let it go. The work is
Yeah.
done. You
Yeah.
be in the moment, you be present, and, you know, the equipment failed in the
Oh,
middle
did
of the
it?
set. In the middle of the set, like, one CDJ, it was still playing, like, everything was fine on this end, it was playing,
Yeah.
but it sound dropped.
Oh, no, God.
A DJ's greatest nightmare, right? The sound dropped, but then normally
Well,
if
the
you
thing is
sound
because they look to you as if you're the sound guy, and I'm like, "This is not my system, I don't know."
but the rookie mistake is you stop the wrong deck, and the sound drops,
Oh,
and then
yeah, yeah,
normally you can, like, "Oh, just hit restart." But
yeah.
I was like, "Oh, no," I had to reload it on another one. But the thing is, it didn't even bother me because I was so in flow state and the crowd was so in flow state with me. They were like, "Keep going, like, it's okay." Like, just like, they didn't want the vibe to stop. I didn't want the
Yeah,
vibe to stop.
yeah,
And it was, like, the greatest set ever, even though the equipment was failing, like, the one in the middle, the bass was kind of going in and out.
yeah.
So, at one point, I was like, "Great, I have one operating CDJ to finish the rest of my set." But the club, like,
Instant doubles, instant doubles.
I was just exactly. I was just vibing with the crowd so much, and I was just really feeling the energy of the music and let go of the imperfections. And when I finished the set, I was chatting with someone. I met someone, like the partner of someone that was there, and I just melted because he paid me like the highest compliment, and he said, I just want to thank you so much because your set enabled me to get out of my prefrontal cortex and my amygdala and like down into my heart and just feel. And I haven't been able to do that for a really long time. So thank you." And I said, "Oh my gosh, if I can give that to one person,
Mhm.
it was all worth it." The late nights, the worrying about the transitions, the thing, like, how am I gonna build this playing new music? 'Cause I just felt so connected to this new song. I was like, I just gotta play it, even though I don't fully know how I'm gonna transition out of it. And I don't play with cue points. I just play by ear.
Yeah.
But it was just this beautiful moment, and it reminded me the power of putting yourself out there, putting something together, taking a risk, doing the best that you can, letting go of the results, and just
Mhm.
being with yourself and accepting. I think that was also the bottom line of this whole reawakening is that what I've had to work with my coaches on for myself and what I work on with my clients is just how do we embody an incredible, radical level of self compassion and self acceptance?
Mhm.
Because I think that truly is the antidote to this kind of poison of feeling like a failure and feeling like you're not enough.
Mhm.
It is that radical acceptance of who I am in this moment, that I am enough, and that radical self compassion that I'm going to make mistakes, or sometimes mistakes will happen that are outside of my control, but I'm
Mhm.
human. And that's part of what makes the process so, so beautiful.
Yeah. That's a really amazing story. And it's such an amazing feeling when you know that your work has had that impact on someone. And like I'll share one of my stories was I was playing a festival weekend and this person came up to me, this gentleman came up to me and he told me, I can always which I've gotten this a lot actually. People are like, "I can always tell when you're playing because you have a really distinct sound." But he's like, "I always know that I'm gonna be in safe hands because when you're playing, it feels like I'm coming home." And that really just hit me. I was like, wow, like that I can have that kind of impact as a DJ to make someone feel like so safe that they're like
Yeah.
coming home and that they're in good hands, you know? It's such a
Oh,
rewarding feeling.
that is so beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think you encapsulated that so perfectly because that is what reclaiming the creative process is.
Mhm.
Coming home. It's coming home to the parts of ourselves that we ignored or neglected or, gave away or sacrificed.
Mhm.
And coming back to that wholeness within ourselves
Mhm.
is is what enables us to continue to create, continue to be curious, continue to feel at home within ourselves and
Mhm.
our surroundings and in our lives. So I think
Mhm.
that's beautiful.
Yeah. I have a question for you. How you personally deal with or how you treat your or teach your clients to deal with because not everybody is on a growth journey and not everybody is, looking to be the best versions of themselves. And not everybody appreciates other people who are on these growth journeys. And so, my question to you would be how do you deal with or how do you recommend dealing with people who um, and not everyone celebrates you, right? So people who resent you or people who I don't know, like kind of get the sense that oh, like she's so egotistical or this that or the other thing or like how do we deal with those kinds of people and those negative thoughts that will get
Mhm.
planted into your brain?
That's also a golden ticket question. It really is, and the reason I think that question is so powerful is because I think anyone who has stepped up to their truth and kind of come home to themselves in a way and taken that risk to live in creative expression as your honest authentic self, anybody who's done that to some level will have at some point experienced someone else trying to pull them down.
Yeah.
There's this saying that's kind of, or this analogy that's really popular in a lot of personal development, is called crabs in a bucket,
Mhm.
where if one person tries to go up, the others will kind of like pull them back down. And the analogy is the importance of our surroundings and being around others who are going to uplift us and encourage and inspire us rather than kind of stab at us and pull us down. And I think what can be so painful is, um, sometimes it's a little easier when it's people that you don't know or that you don't necessarily resonate with, and like to kind of brush them off like those
Mhm.
crabs down in the bucket.
Mhm.
But what is really hard and painful is if you're betrayed by someone that you trusted,
Mhm.
or maybe it's a close family member, maybe it's a
Mhm.
partner, maybe it's, a parent or a sibling, that doesn't quite resonate with you, or maybe there's some jealousy, right? Or like you said, some sort of negative vibes like, "Oh, they're so egotistical," or they think they're all that, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I think it comes back to that creative spirit within us, and anyone that ignites their own creative spirit is kind of like a mirror to other people who haven't yet ignited. So it's gonna feel uncomfortable,
Mhm.
and that crab in the bucket, like, oh, I want to push them away or put them down, like what you said earlier, the people at the top are not there to push others down,
Mhm.
so I think what I have learned in my experience is it wasn't for me. I had a very painful experience with some of these things happening, and for me, it was another peeling of the layer of the onion
Mhm.
to say, okay, I got to really look at myself and again go back to self compassion and self acceptance, and it forced me to stand strong in my truth. There's a saying one of my coaches says this, that I can stand for myself and not against others.
Mhm.
And I love this because it's an analogy of offering grace and forgiveness to others when they hurt us, and also still honoring our boundaries
Mhm.
and the way that we believe we deserve to be treated, and removing ourselves from situations that are violating those boundaries,
Mhm.
but in a loving and forgiving way. And I think honestly, having to experience that has been some of the strongest character building moments of my entire life.
Uh-huh.
And I think every artist and creative that goes through that will experience some amazing character building on their end, right?
Yeah.
Because it's hard. It's hard to forgive people who hurt you. There's the saying about turn the other cheek, but then there's also like, okay, well, but then there's also this thing called boundaries, and that,
Mhm.
I deserve to be respected and treated in a certain way. And if I'm not, then I can remove myself. And that could
Mhm.
be very hard, especially if it's, with a family member or in a workplace or in environments that you can't easily just, walk away from. So
Mhm.
I always encourage anyone that I'm coaching that's dealing with a situation like that, and myself when I'm dealing with those kinds of situations, to first of all take care of yourself, right?
Mhm.
Because it hurts, and acknowledging that it hurts rather than trying to pretend that it doesn't is kind of like the first step, and then
Mhm.
really sort of taking and tending care to my mental health, my own environments, making sure I'm safe and deciding what my boundaries are, and then being able to communicate those in a respectful, graceful way. And then being able to offer forgiveness for any lingering pain, because, forgiveness is such a big word, but the the older I get and the more experience, the more is the point is driven home that forgiveness isn't for the other person, it's for me.
Mhm.
Set me free. So for the individual who is on that growth journey, who does want to become their best self, seeing those painful experiences as another key to turn to reach another layer of your own freedom and growth.
Mhm.
So again, kind of reframing it as this painful thing, but the blessing, what's the blessing in that painful experience? And
Mhm.
and it takes time. Sometimes you really can't rush it.
Mhm.
It takes and sometimes you think, "Okay, how long is this gonna hurt? Oh, I'll just decide it doesn't hurt anymore." We can do that sometimes to a certain extent, but sometimes, we need some coaching or we need some somatic help or we need to go and hit the heavy bag or go for a run and feel the pain so that it can then
Mhm.
be.
Yeah, yeah. I find, kind like you said, it's like peeling an onion, right? And sometimes you think that you've finally gotten past that layer, and then all of a sudden something happens, and you're like, that comes up for you again, and you're like, oh, I still have work to do in that area, I guess.
Totally.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you because you're kind of like me, where you're a bit of a perfectionist, and so you're always looking to be the best, do the best. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, as an artist, as a creative. Obviously, we want to be doing something to the best of our ability, but sometimes that pursuit of being the absolute best can be a little bit toxic, and I think it can lead to burnout. So I wanted to
Mm.
talk a little bit about how to manage, our desire for living to the highest potential versus doing things that aren't really healthy for us at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love this question. I call it like 2 sides of a coin, right?
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, and I was just working with a client about this week or the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about this a lot, is that on the one hand, there's nothing wrong. Again, like I said earlier, by embracing this or reclaiming this creative process, we're not saying you can't be ambitious, you can't be professional, you can't continue to pursue something at the highest level. Because to not do that would then create a depression, right? Which and that would
Mhm.
it creates decay and stagnation. We don't want that. We want to still be moving forward. We want to still be creating. We want to still be improving, right? But at what point does it become toxic, right?
Mhm.
And then on the other side of that, how do we, keep it balanced, keep it in check and still lean into the curiosity, but still be trying to improve all the time. So one thing that I've done recently, I'll tell another little funny story, is that when I recently left my a career in arts administration as a marketer, I have been just going through another process of redefining, what lights me up? What do I want to do? How do I want to continue to grow my coaching business? And one thing that I really wanted to do was to learn to surf. I just kind of put this as a fun thing on
Mhm.
like a list. I don't know why I want to do it. I just wanted to do it. Maybe because it was so scary because I was always like scared of the ocean and I'm not a very good swimmer. I could swim okay. But I live in Colorado, so there's no ocean here. So I
Mhm.
said, "Okay, I'm gonna start by learning to skateboard." I'm quite a bit older. I have always been afraid of this. I have never set foot on a skateboard, but this year I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna learn to skateboard." So I just literally was like so like a granny trying to skateboard, like really slow starting. I just was like, "Okay, here we go." I just a little bit, but then I started to really like it.
Yeah.
And I started on longboarding. And then I got more and more comfortable and, several months ago, I would just be so scared to go down this little tiny hill, and now I'm, like, speeding up and kick pushing to get more and more speed going into that same hill. And so then I sort of advanced myself. I invested and got a surf skate, so now I'm learning to do that and to carve because I wanna learn to surf, but I don't live by
Mhm.
the ocean. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, my point being that I loved this process because it was a creative process that I had fun being bad at something.
Uh-huh.
Like, it's good to kinda temper that high pursuit with something else that you just enjoy for fun that you can let yourself do with curiosity and be okay
Mhm.
being bad at it, right?
Yeah.
Because I think when we're good at something, it's our talent, we've been told all our life we're good at it, and we're trying to do it at a super high level, we forget that it's supposed to be fun.
Mhm.
And so it's important to kinda, like, keep the fun in it by doing other things that keep that energy essence going for you. Like, I
Mhm.
love learning to skateboard because it literally was like when I'm on the board, I can think about nothing else. I just have to be looking at what I'm doing. Are there rocks in front of me? Am I gonna trip? Am I gonna fall? Is there a hill?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. You're really forced to be present in the moment without thinking about the past or the future or what people are thinking of you or anything like that. You just have to like be all in. And also I loved it because I could see progress. I could see progress. And I'm literally doing a thing where you're literally moving forward. Now I'm learning dance skateboarding. So now I'm learning to like go backwards as well, which is fun. um, but I think it is important to do things and that you are reminding yourself that it's okay to be bad at something
Mhm.
and to do it just because you love it.
Yeah.
Um, and then also to allow yourself rest, right? Because I think a lot of this kind of being the best at something and pursuing it to the nth degree, we kind of get in this sort of addictive habit where I just need to do a little more and I just need to do a little more. If I could just get it a little bit better, you
Mhm.
know? And we need to be able to say, okay, I deserve rest with this. It's
Yeah.
good for right now. I'm going to rest and I'll come back to it and see how I can get a fresh perspective or, go for a walk or do something else. And then you'll get an idea on how you can go back and make that thing better.
Mhm.
So I think it's important to use your mindset to give yourself space so that you can get fresh energy and keep the perspective that, hey, this is supposed to be fun. This is the creative process. Not everything's always going to feel good. Like,
Mhm.
especially for musicians, some days you feel in flow state and the sound is gorgeous and the tone is beautiful. I was just chatting with a singer the other day. She's like, oh, I had a lesson and I was singing so great. And I woke up the next day and I was like, where did my voice go? It's gone.
Yeah.
How do I get that back? Right. So it's having grace with yourself in the process and knowing like it's okay. The days where your tone isn't great, that's part of the process too.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I used to be a professional dancer, and so salsa dancer, not like strip pole dancer, but But anyways, I used to be a professional dancer and I was competing on the world stage and stuff, and there were days where you would practice the routine, and it was cuz we did couples routines where we were on teams. And so there were days when like the entire team was just like in a flow state together, and then there were other days where you're just like, okay, today's just not a good dance day, you know? So
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Totally.
yeah, I def
So what helps you get through those moments
Um, I think
without beating yourself up too much?
you know what? I think it's just it's kind of some of the things that you've already said, like sometimes when you push yourself too hard and then you start noticing that you're missing things, right? So when you push too hard, then you start realizing, okay, like I need to give myself a chance to recover because right now I'm missing simple things that I should be getting normally, and that's like a sign to me that you're training too intensely. Um because I think there is such a thing as overtraining. Like, obviously, you don't wanna go
Oh,
in unprepared, but the if you're overtraining, then that it's not always good for you either. But I think
yes.
it's also just having grace with yourself and being gentle with yourself and recognizing, like, not every day is gonna be a good day, and that's okay. And so maybe then you run the routine a few times just to make sure that you're like getting your muscle memory in or whatever, but then it's okay to just like take a day off and be like, okay, like I need a reset. I'm going to take like a day or 2 days off, and then we can come back and revisit this and go from there.
Yeah. Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
So that's what I used to do for my dancing. That's what I do for my DJing too. But like I think the thing for DJing is like there's kind of 2 parts of the DJing, right? Like, there's all the research and
yeah.
the music dives and the going through crates and organizing and stuff, and so all of that I feel is, like, one side of the DJ world, but then there's also, like, the practicing is another side completely, right? And so a lot of the
Yeah.
time, what I'll do is I'll focus on, because library organization, as you know, is always like, it's a never-ending project, right? Your library will never
Mhm.
be 100% organized, and you will never have all the music ever. So so a lot of the time
Yeah.
I go in phases where I'll focus like just on cultivating my library and organizing my library. And then once I have my library more organized, then I go in and I'm like, okay, now I'm going to practice, right? And I'm going to practice like getting into those flow states. I'm going to practice these different types of transitions that I've heard or whatever.
Yeah.
And so then I kind of go back and forth between the two different seasons kind of.
Yeah. That's
Mhm.
great. And then the performing is a whole 'nother 3rd
The
category, right? Because
performing
then you
is
gotta do all that, but really, like, be in touch with the energy in the
Y
room.
yeah, well, it's being in touch with the energy in the room, but also then, like, blocking out the distractions as well
Mhm.
because, there are people behind the booth, there are people coming to say hi to you, the organizer's talking to you, like, the next
Yeah.
DJ is setting up his equipment over there, like, the
Yeah.
previous DJ is whatever, so there's lots of distractions
Totally.
that happen behind the booth too.
Totally.
So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Mm.
It's all good.
Mhm. Yeah. So I'm curious, just on a personal level, though, like how you found because you're a classically trained. And okay, so I want to say flautist, but you say
Uh,
flutist.
I always say either is correct.
Okay.
I'm not one of those that's like, "It has to be this way or that way." I'm just like, "Well, whatever feels right to you."
Okay. Because you're
Flutist or
going.
flautist, because I studied in England, and so they say it different over there than we do here in the US, so
Oh, I see. I see. Um, so going from like a classical music background, and then transitioning into like house and techno, like how did that transition go for you in terms of yeah, just like those things don't really seem connected all the time other than they're both music, but like tell me about that transition for you and how you made that journey from classical to house techno.
that's a great question. Well, I've worked in performing arts, so even all the years when I wasn't performing, on the stage in the symphony orchestra, I was working as an arts marketer, so I worked for,
Mhm.
the opera company, symphony orchestra, and a ballet company.
Mhm.
So, even as I was a performing artist, I was very much in this world of, um, the arts, right? The
Mhm.
arts, creativity, um, how do we communicate that to the world? And so, when I was young and studying music, I never went to clubs, I never drank or did drugs or anything like that, which I still
Mhm.
don't do. So, it was like that scene was not something that I ever participated in.
Mhm.
But when I made these playlists and I started going into the music apps and discovering new music, and I started actually really liking a lot of house music, and I didn't even know it was called house. I was like in one of my libraries and it had like all the genres of my like songs across the top, and I saw something that said deep house, and I was like, deep house, what's that? And I clicked on it and I realized like it was most of my library. I was like, oh, I guess I like that. But I didn't even really know what house music was. So what's been so beautiful about it is that, electronic music and house and techno music has been around a long time now,
Mhm.
but I got to discover it as a newbie, like, for the very first time over the
Yeah.
past, 4 years, which is not
Mhm.
a very long time, and so I started going to once I discovered that and I live in Denver and we have Red Rocks here. So Red
Mhm.
Rocks is a very famous outdoor amphitheater venue in the foothills of the mountains, just on the outskirts of the city. So I would go to concerts at Red Rocks, and then
Mhm.
I started going to some of the clubs, and I would see some of, especially like European DJs and artists that would come through. I would go. We had like an underground focused club, and I would love to go and hear these artists. And I started to just really fall in love with the just the innovation and the freedom of doing different things with the music.
Mhm.
And and I'm like, "Why do I like this so much?" And then I remembered, "Oh, Yeah, that avant-garde flute music, yeah, that was my thing, and I remembered, "Oh, yeah, I got my master's degree in avant-garde flute performance." So, I was playing music by, Boulez and Berio Sequenza, and, like, my flute professor at the Royal Academy was one of the founding members of the London Sinfonietta.
Mhm.
And so he had a lot of experience in experimental music and, 12-tone music, and I just love being able to experiment with sounds and music, and so then the more I started my brother actually, he lives in Berlin, and he's an ambient music house producer, and, so I would go and visit him in Berlin, and I would hear the music, and I'd hear the Berlin Philharmonic, and then we go to Sisyphus, and it's just like to me, it's kind of like it's not the same, but it's about the feeling, that the music
Mhm.
helps me connect with, and
Mhm.
kinda like what that person told you, it's like coming home.
Yeah.
Uh, and so for me, like, I have my record player, and I'll be listening to Von Karajan and the Berlin Philharmonic, and then I'll turn on, a techno record.
Yeah.
And see, like, how, and now what I'm just starting to do now for the first time, my brother was just here this past weekend, and he bought me, a mixer and helped me figure out how to start putting my flute through my decks, because I wanna do a
Oh.
set where I'm playing the flute and doing, my electronic music together. So, I'm just starting to experiment with that, and hopefully this year, I plan to eventually get into music production. So, it really actually goes together very well because I'm just saying, and I think it really helped me because I understood some basic music theory and phrasing and,
Mhm.
timing and things like that. So it enabled me to pick up DJing pretty quickly, and I see it in a different way. Like I understood the music. What I had to really learn was the equipment,
Yeah.
and train my ear for beat matching and train my
Mhm.
ear for like very different things as a DJ. But
Yeah.
for me, I think it was a process of reclaiming the creative
Mhm.
process because it enabled me to do something. One of the best advices I got, one of my friends, how I got into DJing was I, was going to this underground place to hear music, and I danced the whole night away with this other beautiful Latina lady, and she and I left the club together, and she goes, "Oh, I'm a DJ." And I was like, "You're a DJ? That's amazing." And she's like, "Yeah, I'm part of a women's DJ collective." And I said, "Oh, I wanna go. I just wanted to support other women in this industry because,
Mhm.
you know, it's an industry where in the US anyway, women are underrepresented in this industry."
Mhm.
And so I started going to this women's DJ collective just to support other DJs. And this friend of mine said, "You should really try it. I think you might like it." And I was like, "Oh, no, no. I really respect people and their craft, and I don't want to pretend like I know what I'm doing." And she's like, "No, it's fun. You'll get it." And she was moving to Mexico, and she's like, "Here, I'll sell you my decks. Take my decks, play with it." And then so I started mixing a little bit, and I just fell in love with it. So
Mhm.
it really reignited my love, my passion for music, and one of the best advices I got was don't be afraid to try stuff and don't be
Mhm.
afraid to be bad at something. So kinda like skateboarding, I was like,
Mhm.
"Okay, I'm not gonna be afraid to be bad at stuff." So I practiced all kinds of stuff, mixing off key, to explore different things that work. But I think when I started by just exploring stuff that didn't work and not being afraid to do that helped me to
Mhm.
like, to just have fun with it and then be like,
Mhm.
"Oh, okay, that's why we switched the bass here." Or, "Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's why you do this. Oh, that's what a filter does? Oh, I didn't even know that. How do
Yeah.
you loop again?" And like just learning piece by piece by piece, it really has been just a really beautiful journey, I think, of being able to be creative in a way that I'm utilizing my experience and sort of, alchemizing and transmuting this a similar energy that I have as a musician into music, so
Yeah. Yeah. I really love what you said there, like, don't be afraid to be bad at something, right? Because you're never gonna just, like, start something and be amazing at it right away, you know? Like, I
Mm,
think that's very, very few, like, maybe, I don't know, Tiger Woods or something, like, one of those, like, four-year-old prodigies who, you know? But, like, just having the courage to step up and do it even though you're scared. I remember when I first started DJing, And I just had like a little DJ 400 or whatever, like Pioneer's like smallest little thing or whatever. And that was my like intro thing that I tried on. And I literally just sat on, like, step one for me was just like opening up the box and putting it on my desk. And it like literally just sat on my desk for like 6 months because I was so intimidated. And then finally, like, I started just experimenting. But it's amazing to me. And this is going back to our conversation about like having unconditional like love and acceptance for yourself, was that I was like embarrassed of myself almost, or like
Yes.
embarrassed of my own judgment of myself, and
Yeah.
when I started, and that was why I didn't like it, just sat there for the longest time because
Mhm.
it was like I was judging myself, and it was like, who the heck do you think you are that you gonna like be
Mhm.
a DJ? And so
Totally.
yeah, and that
I
still
can
happens.
relate with that.
Yeah, that still happens to me sometimes. That still happens to me sometimes. Like when I'm going to Europe and I'm traveling and I like sometimes I'm sitting on the plane and I'm like, is this really real? Like you're like traveling to Europe to go on a DJ tour or whatever it is, and you're like, but the nicklings of self-doubt come in, and it's like, no, like you've done the training, you've done the work, like you
Mm,
deserve to be here, right? And having that kind of like unconditional love and acceptance for yourself, that I can do this. I am
yeah.
worthy and capable of doing this.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah, and being around others that remind us of that
y
because
yeah.
we forget.
Yeah.
We forget, and we need to be reminded, "No, you are worthy, you're capable, you've got this, you're awesome," and
Yeah.
being around others that are like that tide that lifts all boats instead of the
Yeah.
crabs.
Yeah. So we are getting close to our time. There was one other thing that I wanted to talk about before we wrap up, though, because at the very beginning, one of the first things that I wrote down here in my notes was that you were feeling, when you looked up at that poster and you felt nothing, and then you kind of felt like you were unfamiliar with yourself. And so I want to kind of just wrap this whole thing up in terms of how you came home to yourself, and like what did you discover about yourself along the way?
Oh, goodness, that is such a beautiful question. How did I come home to myself? It's definitely a process. I think it starts with intention.
Mhm.
It starts with intention of looking around and saying, "Okay, something feels off. Let's explore and see what that is." It takes being open-minded to start the
Mhm.
journey. They say that the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. And
Mhm.
I think that's really true. A lot of times when people come to me and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I've just had this realization, I'm getting in my own way," or "I have all this doubt," and you have this big moment of like, "Ooh, that doesn't feel good," right?
Mhm.
We tend as high achievers to immediately go to self-judgment. "Oh, well, something must be wrong with me."
Mhm.
I don't want to be feeling this. But I think rather than going that route, it's a beautiful thing to celebrate it and say, "Okay, this is good because now gained an awareness that I want something more. I want more life. I want more life." And
Mhm.
so I think that open-mindedness and the willingness to go on the journey is the first step. And as long as you have that intention, you will always find your way back to home. But
Mhm.
using the imagination to continue to imagine where you wanna go is really important, because a lot of times we just stay stuck, "Well, I don't know what I want. I don't know what I want. I don't know what." As long as you tell yourself you don't know what you want, you won't know what you want.
Mhm.
So kinda cutting off that cycle and saying, "Okay, let's go on the journey. Let's start to explore. Let's be okay with the unknown for a little bit. Let's celebrate the fact that we have this big scary feeling and work through it,
Mhm.
being willing to work through it." So I think those were some of the things that really enabled me to come home to
Mhm.
myself, because at every juncture, it's like we get to make a choice. What are the things I can control? What are the things that I can't? Like that famous prayer, right? "God grant me
Mhm.
the serenity to," accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that
Mhm.
was one thing that really helped guided me back. What are the truly letting go of things I can't control, right? What other people
Mhm.
think about me, or the economy, or just there's so many things we can't control.
Mhm.
Whether or not the decks are gonna work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I can control my energy. I can control my thoughts. I can control what I'm doing to nourish myself. I can control if I'm gonna give myself rest. I can control if I have self-compassion and self-acceptance. So that's really what enabled me to be on the journey and to stay on the journey and to not give
Mhm.
up in the process of coming home to myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what was the second part of the question? I'm sorry.
I think that pretty much covered it
Yeah,
actually, like, just the process
yeah.
that you went through, and to kind of get to know yourself again or get to know who you truly were coming home to yourself, but I think that really covered it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many different modalities too, meditation was a big piece, gratitude was a big positive piece.
Mhm.
I'd have to say though that one of the hugest pieces is it was having a coach, having a
Mm.
mentor, having someone to be there to remind me, "You're on the right path,"
Mhm.
"Just take the next right step. You're doing great," you
Yeah.
know? Like you
Yeah.
said, we forget. And honestly, that's why I became a high performance creative coach, life coach, mentor,
Yeah.
friend, because I gained so much from having, advisors, by having, clarity coaches and
Mhm.
people come alongside and help me on that journey. I
Mhm.
think, there's a lot of things we can do alone, and I think especially as high achievers and, strong Latin women, we're like, "I can do everything on my own. I'm super independent." But that is why I became a coach, is because I know I couldn't have made that journey and be where I am today without the coaches, the mentors, and the support that I had in my
Mhm.
life
Yeah.
to to continue on the journey when the going gets rough. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. So we are at end of time, but for people who want to connect with you or learn more about you, where is the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, so my website is going live soon, rachelperez.com. That will have information about, um, working with me, doing some coaching, mentorship, anything like that that you might be interested in. I'm also on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. So those are the best places to find me online.
Okay, perfect. And we'll put the links to all of those resources in the description. So,
Awesome.
yay. Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for being here. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did too.
Absolutely. It's so great to meet you. And thank you for holding space for these conversations, because it is so important for us to know that we're not alone,
We're not
that these
alone.
experiences, that other people
Yeah.
experience these things too, and
Yeah.
that there's no shame in them, and that in fact we can all rise together. So thank you
Yes,
so much.
exactly. Thank you. Okay. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
DJ Savvy.